Welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Pamela Gupta, CEO of Trusted AI and host for the podcast Trustworthy AI, De-risk AI Adoption for Business. I believe trustworthy AI is essential to be built in the very DNA of AI system development, adoption, or deployment. And hence our logo, Trusted AI, has a DNA strand for the I in AI. Um, why do we need trustworthy AI, and can it really help a business to adopt it at the very outset? Right. That's what this podcast is about, and I'm really excited to have Adrian with us. Um, Adrian, please help me pronounce your last name so
It's
don't
Sanabria.
mangle it. Sanabria. So Adrian Sanabria is a veteran and a thought leader in Infosec. So you've heard of him, you've seen him in many different avenues, media outlets such as his podcast, Security Weekly, Cybersecurity Risk Alliance, and he's a thought leader who is very much looking at InfoSec holistically. Um, he's a successful generalist, a self-proclaimed generalist, but I would say he's very much a holistic expert and has over 2 decades of experience in hacking, in developing, in breaking, building, and teaching in information security. So, welcome to the
Thank
podcast,
you. Thank you
Adrian.
for that generous intro.
Absolutely. So, I wanted to kind of start out with a topic that is on top of everybody's mind, which is generative AI. But when we're talking about de risking it and creating trustworthy generative AI, there are a lot of things that come to mind. One of them is cybersecurity. Um, Case in point, recently there was at DEF CON a red teaming exercise around breaking AI, generative AI, and testing it and kicking its tires, right, to see if it's secure. So I'm going to be focused a little bit more on what is the right approach when it comes to securing LLMs, large language models, and generative AI. So we'd like to go into red teaming, but before we do that, I want to ask you, what do you see as the value of generative AI and
I
LLMs?
think the value is huge. I think before LLMs, and I think really the watershed moment was OpenAI making ChatGPT available to the general public. Like being able to put your hands on a technology makes such a difference. Like we've been talking about quantum computing for decades, and you can go to IBM, a few other vendors, and you can actually use a quantum computer, but it's much more difficult to do that than it is to uh, get a free account on ChatGPT, jump in there and start writing things in the prompts. So I think before with AI, it was just like quantum computing. It was one of these technologies that you'd hear about, like you'd hear about digital transformation. Like nobody knows what it is, but everybody talks about it. The word gets thrown around, and you might have a general idea of what we're talking about, but it's much more tangible when there is a free service or a very cheap service out there where you can go and use it. So I think this has really transformed how people see AI. And I should jump back a little bit. Not just ChatGPT, but DALI and all the image generators as well, right? Like a lot of those are free, and people can jump in and create different things. And in most of our social feeds, on a daily basis, we're seeing things now generated by some of these generative AI tools. So we're suddenly very much exposed to the results of that. Whereas like with quantum computing, we haven't seen the output of anything with that. We can't even do error correction with quantum computing yet. So it's very much still, kind of like a, future technology that could have an impact on something. But I think it's, the value that we're seeing from AI was almost immediate in some use cases. And I think that's one of the interesting things here is to dial in on the use cases where it is useful. And I think people tend to jump to extremes, and there are a
Mhm.
lot of podcasts and discussions about, is AI going to destroy humanity and things like that. And then you look at the value people are actually getting out of it. They're formatting data for a spreadsheet, right? they're taking a 1,500 word blog post and making it 800 words. They're very, low level, humble types of use cases, but save a ton of time. We were paying somebody, something like $10,000 a month to create content for us, to generate content for us, and honestly, a $20 a month ChatGPT account was delivering better value, than than that 10 grand that we were paying, a content writer for. So it's definitely had an impact. There's definitely value in it, but yeah, so far very specific use cases. Other use cases are still very much up in the air.
Yes, thank you. I think that is an excellent point. It is so compelling and such a could be a potential cost saver. So it's very compelling for business reasons, right? It's not something that's going to go away. Which brings me to the next point, right? Given the fact that it is on the horizon and it's very much, as you said earlier in your first point, right? That the reason it has become so important in everybody's lives and become an important part of a conversation is that it's not something that is being done about you or for you. This is something that can be tangible in a user's hands, right? We can all see what we can do with it. This is not that you don't need a highly sophisticated usage of AI. This is AI that everybody
Mhm.
can see and use. So, what that brings with it some known and unknown dangers. What do you think are the risks of
Yeah,
LLMs?
I think it's really transformative technology. Like when you think back to the internet, we had all kinds of problems with the internet. Browsers weren't secure in the beginning. If you recall, when we started buying things online and using credit cards online, no websites were encrypted. It happened rather fast, but only 15 years ago, still like over half of the web wasn't encrypted yet. And then Google said, okay, well, we're going to trash your page rankings unless you set up HTTPS in your website. All of a sudden, everybody got that encrypted real quick because the correct incentives were there. If you were on the internet, if you had a website,
Hmm.
to use security. So we're going to see some similar things here where we have to make sure the right incentives are in place. And one of the things I worry about here is when this data is trained. And the example I love to use is I'm going to blank on the name right now. Stack Overflow. So if I'm going to train data, and Stack Overflow
Hmm.
was one of the early websites to say, hey, in the future, if you want to scrape our data and use our data for training in your models, you're going to have to pay us. And Reddit was very close behind them, and they've since closed their data, even though it's publicly visible. Some of these the companies that build these training sets, these data sets, are now going to have to pay to access that data to include in a training model. But if you've ever been on Stack Overflow, you ask a question, my code won't run, or I'm having trouble with Excel. There's all kinds of technical questions people go there for. And then the person who asks the question can say you get 16 answers. They can go through those answers. Some of those answers are right, some of them are wrong. Some of them that are right are more useful than others. The responses was better formatted, it was more helpful. Maybe they wrote some example code, and you get to choose the accepted answer. So one of those 16 answers has a green check mark on it. Now, when this data was collected to produce a large language model, you know, was that training aware of the green check mark of the one that was accepted, or does it treat the wrong answers equally
Hmm.
as the accepted correct answers versus the correct answers that are maybe less useful? There's this whole gradient of right and wrong information, of factual and made up and biased information on the internet. And this stuff, I can't imagine that they're adjusting the quality for all these different things because it would be so hard to do. Just Stack Overflow is just one website. Reddit is just one website. And they're useful to humans because they've got the up and down votes. But once you're scraping that text off of there and just feeding it into a machine, I've got to imagine you're getting the bad data in there, and it's being probably being treated equally to all the other data. Unless I'm wrong about this, and they have these, this custom programming where they're going in there and they've got a quality ranker script for Reddit, and then one for Stack Overflow, and one for every single website out there, which I mean, that would be a huge undertaking. But otherwise, the information you're getting out of an LLM is about as right or wrong as the internet. The entire internet is right or wrong. And there's a lot of bad information on the internet, as we know well. In fact, I've tested this. There's a few organizations who make up fake stats in Infosec, and maybe you've seen the like $10 trillion in damages, a stat that gets thrown around. Sometimes it's 9 trillion, sometimes it's 15 trillion, and that stat is been dissected, by tons of different academics and different groups, and it's very wrong. But ChatGPT will offer that up to you as a fact, because it's been out there enough. It's been in Forbes, it's been in all these different publications, and it's permeated the internet. It's incorrect information, but ChatGPT doesn't know that. All it knows is that I've seen this a lot out there, and it ends up in those responses when you ask it questions.
That's true. It's a problem that I was reading that is not going to go away because that is the very way these models work and how they're training the whole reinforcement cycle, etc. So this is not a problem that we would be able to solve. So it almost sounds as if the people who should be using or trusting the output from these systems should be limited to a group who understands what the context is and be able to determine if these answers are, indeed spot on, accurate, can be used further for further decision making or
So
analysis,
again,
etc. So
this
I
comes back
think,
to your use case. If I want it to shorten my blog post from 1,500 words to 700 words, I don't care how good it is at facts, right? Like it's very use case dependent.
right, right. Yeah, that's an excellent point, Adrian. So, how do you think businesses can actually solve for this? Right? What is there is okay? That's I think we kind of went into that. So let's talk a little bit about these cybersecurity risks that come from LLMs. Is there a risk that you see that is unique to generative AI, a cybersecurity risk, and what are they? And then we can talk about some of the
Yeah,
mitigations.
so there's plenty of cybersecurity use cases where, one I've seen pulled into a lot of products. We do see a lot of vendors using LLMs now, to improve their products, features in the products. One of them is remediation guidance. So if the LLM was created in 2021, I think September 2021 is at least last time I checked when ChatGPT, when its model was last updated. Any information newer than that, it's not aware of. So if I ask it for how to fix a security vulnerability or a misconfiguration in Google Cloud, and Google Cloud did a total refresh of their UI and their UX in 2022, it doesn't know about that. It's going to tell me to go to this screen that no longer exists and then click this, which no longer exists. That information is going to be out of date. So the age of the LLM and what it knows is something you have to take into account. And then the easy fix for that is we now have plugins, with ChatGPT and other open source. Since open source LLMs are out there, people are giving it all kinds of plugins and power where it can just reach out to the live internet and learn stuff that maybe the language model itself doesn't have in there, but because it can browse the web and look for things, you can solve some of that with that. But then, that runs into other issues as well, because yeah,
Yes,
yeah, maybe so it browses the
I
internet,
was
it looks for how to
going to say that.
remediate that, and it picks up in an article that was written in 2020, and you're right back at square one. You've got the same problem. The article isn't new enough. It's giving you outdated instructions to fix a problem.
Right. And the other issue I know that you're going to be talking about when it comes to LLM access to open internet is that API access, right? The API, firstly, API abuse has been part of the OWASP top 10, which is the organization that takes a look at what are the security vulnerabilities in internet accessible systems. So API abuse being one, and then it's a question of prompt
Mhm.
injections, as we know, right? So these are not easy problems to solve. What is your thought about the red teaming exercise that even the
Mhm.
White House was putting its weight behind DEFCON, and how adequate do you think a red teaming exercise is for something that is so complex, such as LLMs? Because for me, the very premise of red teaming is kind of like kicking a tire to see, is
Yeah,
it robust, right? Is it going to withstand? But it presupposes that the tire has been built to
right.
specification. It has been following standards and is a robust
Right.
built product. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
and with red team and pen testing in general, not even specific to AI, scope is very important. If I tell you I need you to do a pen test,
Mhm.
but all you're allowed to do is try to break this encryption, you're taking a lot of things off the table, like my ability to social engineer a user and steal the private key for that encryption, or hack into a computer and steal that private key. And in the real world, that's how we see most security broken, is out at the fringes. Like the control isn't attacked directly; it's often attacked indirectly, or the mistake that results in our downfall is like a simple misconfiguration. It's like something we see with a lot of IoT devices. Is to keep using my encryption metaphor here, the private key is stored in the same directory, as the encrypted data. So if you get any access to the system at all, the private key is right there. You can decrypt all the data. Um, so with generative AI, it's very similar. Like a lot of the focus I've seen is, oh, it'll help me build malware. I can improve my malware. Things that are very direct. And I think the real world issues are going to be much more indirect when we see this used. For example, and again, all this comes back to use cases. I see an irresistible use case where a company, where there are going to be products and offerings that allow you to train an LLM on a company's internal data. Like imagine, maybe it takes me 30 hours to build the quarterly report that I present to the board. Once I feed all my company's information to an LLM, I can just tell it, and I can feed it copies of old quarterly reports. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I know how to do this. I know where to find the data to put this report together. All of a sudden, you save 30 hours a quarter because you can just ask it to generate that report. But then somebody realizes, oh, HR data was also fed into that. So, it begins to be abused internally, and somebody says, what was David's performance bonus last quarter? And how much work did they do to justify that bonus? So these are the kinds of things you're not going to see show up in like a red teaming exercise, or attackers will realize that a company's internal LLM is connected to an email address, and they can now,
Yes.
start pen testing basically that, or exfiltrating sensitive data, proprietary data through a company's email address or through a chatbot, even maybe right on the front of their web page, the little chat bot that's, like intercom, something that's like that, that says, how can I help you? That's going to be a key use case for LLMs. LLMs are very good at automated support. And if that training data, if that model is fed data that shouldn't be in there, people will find it, and they'll abuse those, and they'll figure out how to pull out that data.
Wow, that's a very great point, and Adrian. Really something for everyone to think about, because and not only is it a so for example, when I'm thinking about LLM security, right, of a enterprise AI LLM security model, I'm thinking about, hey, you know what, the traditional access model doesn't change, the existing cybersecurity measures don't change, and then there are things such as how LLMs can now, like I was talking about earlier, API abuse and things of that nature. But you bring up an excellent point, which is, what about data that is fed in there, which actually can
Yeah.
cause further vulnerability,
Yeah.
right? That's really,
And
I
I
think,
think
a
that's one of
great
the
point.
top. So there's a couple things that I recommend people do. The first is to actually use it, to get familiar with how it works. And if you want to play around with prompt injections, which is probably the number one risk with LLMs. In fact, OWASP has an LLM top 10, and that is number one on their top 10 is prompt injections.
Right.
So go check out OWASP's top 10 for large language models. But there's a company out there that has a tool that you can use to practice prompt injections called Gandalf. So if you go to gandalf.lakera.ai, you can that gives you a really good idea of what prompt injection looks like and how it works. And the other thing I recommend that people do is they really need to understand data classification in their organization, because there will come a time where somebody says, we're going to feed the company's data into this thing, and we're going to have this amazing virtual employee that knows the answer to all our questions and has perfect memory and can do amazing things. And all that is correct. Uh, but to make it amazing, they're going to have to shove a lot of data into it. And when that happens, you're not going to have time to pick and choose what data that is. A lot of data is just going to be shoved in there wholesale. So we need to start, organizations need to start now identifying well, separating their data out, making sure they have solid data classification and labeling, so that when that time comes, they can say, we know what data is safe to shove in there and what data is not, like the HR data, for example, if that's not your use case.
Yes, thank you so much. Those are excellent points to think about as we end this. I think it brings up the point about, yes, access control, as we know, is a foundation of Infosec, right? And to take that into, it brings it into a much more higher impact when we're talking about putting in sensitive data or not having a cognizance of what is sensitive data as we put it into these LLMs. So, really excellent points. And I think this is a good point
Sure.
to conclude at. We're going to be having more conversations, but this is, thank you so much for giving us that insight, those insights, as well as your points to think about as we go
It's been a
adopting these
pleasure. Thank you,
systems.
Pamela.
Thank you, Adrian. Bye.